Anyone sports fans around here? Aaron Hernandez, anyone know who Aaron Hernandez is? Why does Aaron Hernandez, what does that have to do with interviewing?
Everybody knows about it.
Everybody knows about it.
Conversation piece.
Okay, so Aaron Hernandez is accused of murdering someone. Still needs to go through the normal process. So he goes through this process. They accuse him, and so now he's sitting here, and the media gets on top of it and says, and someone else says, well, hold on a second. I was involved, and he shot me in the eye. Huh. And then all of a sudden, you start to hear some things that he was involved in gangs. He could potentially have been involved in another murder. What's all this have to do with interviewing?
Telling a story.
Telling a story, but it's also about leopards never change their spots. And what we're going to talk about today is the way that interviewers are going to ask you questions are specific to get you to a point to talk about yourself, which will identify patterns and trends about you. And you won't even realize it. And it's called behavioral-based interviewing. Give me a time when. Give me another time when. And we'll talk about some of those examples. We're also going to talk about what interviewers are really looking for. We're going to talk about the pitfalls that come into play when we're in that moment of public speaking. That fear, that anxiety that pulls up. We're going to talk about, if we have time, how to banish those nerves. And then if we have time, we'll go over some examples of behavioral-based interviewing. Stop me at any point. Take me on a tangent if you want to take me on a tangent. Ask the questions as they're happening. Because this is about you. This isn't about me. But what I'd like to start with, all right, so now we have Aaron Hernandez on the table. Let's switch it up a little bit and make him a little bit happier. From an article from CNN from a couple years ago, these are actual questions that were heard in an interview. If you were a superhero, who would you be and why? Anybody? Name a superhero.
Wonder Woman.
Superman, Wonder Woman. Is there a right or a wrong answer to that? The looks on your faces when I ask that question is the same look you're probably going to give to an interview. Why the heck are you asking me that question? And as soon as you give me the why the heck are you asking me that question, you're giving the interviewer the reaction they were expecting. Now they're going to sit there and question your confidence level. They're going to question your ability to think quickly on your feet. So what I want you to think about today is, how do you keep your confidence, and even on the most surprising of questions, keep your composure? Because it's about, you can even get a chuckle out of it and say, that's an interesting question you asked. And take that pause to say, that's really interesting. Let me think how I would answer that. Because if a lot of the answers I get, I don't know. Am I done yet? I've heard that. I've heard that in the thousands of interviews that I've conducted. I've heard people say, I'm done with my answer now. You know, you hear these things and don't ever get surprised by things you could potentially hear or things that could potentially come out of your mouth you'll never get back. If every time you entered a room your theme song played, what would it be and why?
Sometimes it's okay to probably not say as a theme song, not specifically answer, but actually go around the concept.
And because there's no right or wrong answer.
Yeah.
There is no right or wrong answer to these things. There's no right or wrong answer unless it's a very technically based question for you. So it is all about confidence. It is all about being able to say, let me think about that. That's a really interesting question. My theme song will be You Light Up My Life. Have some fun with it. Enjoy and explain why. You're going to be asked questions in an interview. A wide array of questions. And a lot of times when it comes to an interview, we treat it as Q&A. You ask me a question, and I answer it. And then I wait for the next question. What I invite you to do in the interview process is to make it a two-way dialogue. Make it an interactive discussion. When you're sitting at the dinner table with your family, you're talking. It's give and take. It's not interrupting each other in the middle of an interview, but you might want to say, well, hold on a second. That's really interesting that you brought that up because I just read an article about something like that. Or do you mind if I ask a question relating to that point you just made? Because what you're going to find is interviewers a lot of times like to talk. You're making it about them. As an interviewer should make it about you, as I'm trying to make today about you, you should also try to make it about them. And that means not buttering up to them, but it means getting onto their good side, not with bribes, but with good, solid answers in a dialogue, an engaging conversation, because that's going to differentiate you from everyone else that's out there, is by having this conversation with someone. Being able to have this dialogue with someone.
And does not necessarily means I ask, depending, I could mention something or add a statement to what I said or a story, and then they can pick up on that, not necessarily have to directly ask them a question. It's just something that triggers their mind to make a comment. It doesn't have to be, okay, now what about this? I don't have to ask a question.
And I'm really glad you brought that up because you want to not necessarily just justify, but provide an example with every answer that you give. So let me give you an example, and then you can go down and talk about that. One of the hardest things that people have to answer is, tell me a little bit about yourself. So if I was to say, and I'm not going to ask you to do this now, but if I was to ask, tell me a little bit about yourself, could you do it in 2 to 5 minutes? Clear, concise, succinct. And think about it. If the answer is, I don't know, or no, you have homework tonight. And your homework tonight is to write your elevator speech. And your elevator speech should be a 2 to 5 minute speech, closer to the 2 minute, that tells a little bit about yourself. Robert just read my elevator speech. Now, it is adaptable. I can make it a 30-second version. I can make it a 5-minute version if you'd like. But there is an utmost confidence in how I present myself and what I've accomplished and why I'm going to be good for your organization. It's going to change based off of how I'm refining it or aligning it to the job I'm applying for. I might change some language to make sure that it's consistent with the language that you might use in that type of businesses out there. But it is still about the elevator speech and confidence. There is no such thing as a perfect answer. So stop looking for one. What happens is our head is spinning so quick to say, let me find that perfect answer, that we just stop. And we pause. And we freeze. And then the interviewer says to us, is everything okay? My very first interview, they said, Tom, would you like some water? Yes. It's about confidence. You can confidently give any answer you want out there. And it's all up here. It's all there. So I'm going to ask another question. And we are going to answer this. If you could be any tree in the world, what tree would it be?
Oh, I just did what I wasn't supposed to do. I just realized
But
that.
of it, you're going to avoid doing that going forward.
Right.
So if you could be any type of tree, what would it be?
I'd say an elm tree. An elm tree. No, I shouldn't say I would say. I should say an elm tree.
And what am I waiting for?
Why? An example or why?
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 It should always, so thank you for being the example.
Yes.
It's why. But that's the point, is we sit there and we answer the question. We say, next question, please.
Well, what's tough with those types is that, like, when you asked, I don't know what you guys, but with the superhero, I thought of Wonder Woman, then I'm like, okay, what is that going to say about us? Then why do I have to say why? It's just the first thing that popped into my head. Which is
But the first thing that pops in your head's okay, because you can align them all. You can be Minnie Mouse. as a superhero and put it in there. And so you want to get why. So why would you pick an elm tree?
That was a tree that we had in our front yard growing up. So for me, that's a great memory. It was about family tree.
Okay. Perfect.
I would first ask, is there a specific reason why I need to be a tree, and is there a background story so I can have a context, because I could be different trees depending what the needs for.
Okay, then I would take all that stuff that you just asked me and said, is there something specific you're looking for with this question? Or what specifically are you looking for? Are you looking for strength or flexibility? I can be either one. And then you can talk it that way.
That's good.
I like the birch tree, and the reason why I like the birch tree is because it's colored white, and you can make interesting crafts out of the white
Okay.
birch.
So it showed, to me, I bet you're creative.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, see, I'm not.
I'd say a palm tree. So it's always where it's warm and everyone is always happy all the way around it.
Okay, so you're looking to satisfy people around you. Perfect.
Lilac,
Smells good. Smells good.
the flowers,
Okay.
the leaves.
So you like beautiful things?
I do.
Okay.
An oak tree because it has its own seasonality and it's always changing.
Perfect.
First thing that popped in my head was the apple tree.
Okay.
It's fruitful, and pretty much everyone likes apples. Tastes good.
And the first thing that popped into your mind are these trees. Some of you had 30 seconds to think about it, some didn't. But I got a pretty good indication of who you are by the type of tree you picked.
Where are we in the tree?
I know you haven't picked a tree yet.
The first one that popped in my head was an oak too.
Okay.
Because I thought about seasons. Okay, in the summer I cool off, in the winter be dormant. But then I said, well, if I want to benefit deers or other animals, it's good to be a conifer because that way they cool in the summer and they protect underneath in the winter too. So it's like.
So let's come back to the majority of questions that are asked in an interview are never right or wrong. So I was doing this with a high school group once, and there was this playful kid who sat there and said, I want to be a cactus. Is cactus a tree? Do I care? No. He said, because I'm prickly. I'm hard to get to know. But there are people who can burrow into me, and they live off of me as a cactus because of the water that's inside me. And we're attached. And I become very close to those who know me, who finally get the chance to know me. Wow. And this other kid said, I'm going to be a Christmas tree. Wasn't what I was thinking about, but I remember these kids. I remember their two answers to it. And the Christmas tree comes out and he says, because it's festive. It makes people happy. You can decorate me any way you like based off of your wants and needs, so it shows my flexibility. Now you're starting to differentiate yourself. Because you're thinking in terms of, the first one I always thought about was oak. It's strong, it's steady, it sits here. You can go any one of these. You can go weeping willow. I like to cry over everything. I'm sensitive. Whatever it may be, you can pick whatever you want and there's no wrong answer. You just have to go with it full tilt. And be absolutely confident behind your answers, because who's going to know you better than you? And what happens is we have this hesitancy when it comes to interviewing. This, I just don't like to talk about me. This is your chance. And that's why I like to call this program, It's Not Bragging If It's a Fact. One of the toughest questions that people have to answer is, what's your greatest accomplishment? Now, although this should be part of your elevator speech, if it's not, if someone was to say to you, what's your greatest accomplishment, who would know what that greatest accomplishment is? Only you. So you can ask me this today and I'll change my answer for you tomorrow. I spent an hour with people asking what my greatest accomplishment was, and I just kept changing my answer over and over. Because it is about the confidence that's behind the answer and how it aligns to the context of what you're applying for. But is it really bragging if I say I have a couple award-winning books? If I run up and down the streets and say that, sure. But in this context right here today, I'm hoping it builds a little bit of credibility, that I've invested a lot of time in doing this. I think I know what I'm talking about. By the way, don't ever use the word think in an interview. I think, maybe, I'm not sure. Those, push it to the side. But we tell you this to gain credibility. And you gain credibility when you start talking about the things that make you who you are and make you special. So you need to have your story come alive. And you make your story come alive when you start showing people that you've been able to accomplish some things. You shouldn't walk out of that office saying, gosh, I wish I really said this. We all will do that. That's almost a promise. But can you walk out of there saying, I gave everything that I possibly could with the utmost confidence? So one of the things I also talk about is how do you think quickly on your feet? What is the best way to think quickly on your feet? Because what is an interviewer looking for? For you to be able to give me quick answers. Are you allowed to pause and think about it? Absolutely. Do you want to take 3 minutes to pause and think about it? No. But you want to take about 15 seconds and think about it, get the answer in your head, and then go full steam ahead with it. Make sure that people see you're going down that path and you're going to go down hard with that path. So to think quickly on your feet, it's all about preparation and understanding what you're interviewing for, understanding the company, understanding the mission, understanding the people you're going to be talking to. So let's play some examples. Because I lost my job on D-Day, June 6th, displacement day. And from that point forward, I've been doing my preparation for interviews. I have one at 4 o'clock today. I didn't know about that until yesterday. But when the person called and I was on the road coming down here, she said, she said, is there anything I can do for you? I said, no, I should be in pretty good shape. She's like, well, maybe I can send you a copy of the job description. I said, I already printed out a copy. I have. Because you have to go down your own checklist of what would you want if you got that interview. So when I apply for a job, the first thing I do is I save the job description. And whether it's online or I printed it, it depends on where I am and what I'm doing with it, but know exactly what it is. And then figure out, if possible, who you're going to talk to. There are recruiters that run a lot of this show. The recruiters aren't the ones you need to talk to. Who do you need to talk to? The hiring manager. So try to get your information from people that are in the hiring side. If you do enough networking, you'll also figure out that there are people that are behind the scenes. So tell me a little bit about the person I'm interviewing with or for. Or tell me a little bit about the position. What's your priorities in this position? I just got off the phone a half hour ago with the person I'll be replacing. He had no idea who I was or how I got his phone number. But I talked to some people and I said, listen, Chris, I'm coming in and I'd like to have some information about the job that you previously did. And here's a little bit of information about me, so I'm just not calling you out of the blue. And I had some questions ready for him. I said, I'm very respectful of your time, so let me just spend less than 10 minutes with you. I spent 10 minutes with him and got a plethora of information. These are the notes from the 2 people I talked to. I had somebody call me on the way down. I left them a message earlier this morning. They called and said, do you know this person? They said, I know a little bit about them. I said, do you know about this position? They said, oh yeah, let me tell you about the organization and the culture behind it. I have 15 pages from yesterday's interview. It's about doing your preparation and homework. And so you're going to find within your packet of information, there's a page that looks like this. It's called the interview SWOT. And then the long-term vision. And it might be hard to read, but I'll explain what it is. Has anyone heard of a SWOT analysis before? Okay. And have you ever heard it being used for an interview process? Okay. Do you guys want to tell us what a SWOT is, or you want me to go into it?
Strengths, opportunities, and threats.
Okay. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It was created in the late 60s, I believe. There's a project management tool. And it has evolved over time. I started using it for the interviews to see if I was aligned to the job. Or if I didn't feel 100% confident that I was aligned to the job, I use this to put my thoughts to paper. So instead of being wavy and figure out, I don't know, I'm not sure, turned into, here are your strengths as to what you can do for this company or for this particular job. The weaknesses are if you're talking to people and you know people within the organization, and especially if you know what the role is all about. So you can use your history, if you have it, on things that you've been able to do with similar positions. Or if you've talked to people and maybe they'll talk to you off the record and say, oh, the place is a mess. They need some leadership. So you can then put in your strengths, leadership. And the weaknesses, you might put opportunity to stabilize the business leadership, or come in, have someone who has leadership skills, or apply leadership skills, or look, maybe somebody says you're working in silos. Everyone's working in silos. No one talks to each other. Well, let me give you some examples of where I've been able to build partnerships. So the weakness might be silos. Your opportunities are, I like to look at the strengths as, here, me. This is about me. Weaknesses are things that you've picked up on. You have to be careful in how you phrase this, and I'll explain that in a moment. But stay politically correct as much as you can, but don't be afraid to be transparent and put some things that, in my discussions and research for this position, this is what I found out about your organization. It might be hearsay, but this is what I've heard, this is what I'd like to move with. So your opportunities are your actions. So there should be almost an arrow pointing up to it of, what can I do to fix some of these things? Well, I have a history of building partnerships. Or maybe I've done a lot of project management and I see you're looking for project management skills. Let me give you an example where I've done some expense cuts, or where I've done some marketing and sales. Here's a creative idea that I had that might be helpful for you. And so you can start to put some actions together. So think of it in bigger picture of how I can apply these to your mission. Think in terms of the weaknesses, or the opportunities, the O, as being actions and being internal. Things that you can do, things that you have control over. Control what you can control. So if I was to come in on day one, here are some things I'd think about. Threats are external. Those things you can't necessarily control over, but they should be in your vision. So maybe regulatory, if you're working for banks. Regulatory environment is all over that. I can't control if someone comes in and says, this is a new regulation tied into Obamacare. I can't control the interpretation of that ruling. What I can control is my reaction to that. So these are some things I might be paying attention to. And these threats, by the way, is also ties into whether you might want this job or not. One of the jobs I'm looking for is a compensation type position. It deals in the mortgage business. Well, I know there was an interpretation from the Dodd-Frank Act that had to do with mortgage origination and how they pay people their incentive. And my question is going to be as a threat, and I'll ask it at 4 o'clock today, does the interpretation of the Dodd-Frank Act mean that my job would be at risk a year from now? Because it just goes away. These are some of the things that get you thinking in the right way. And now imagine, what do you do with this thing that you have, now that you have it? And there are a lot of different ways to use this thing. Remember, we're talking about 100 people that could be applying for the same job. How do you differentiate yourself from everyone else who's out there? This is one of many ways to differentiate yourself. Do I guarantee this thing's going to work? No. Do I guarantee it gets their attention? Heck yeah. Because what you'll be able to do is, it depends on your timing and the relationship you have in the process. So I knew someone in the process and I said, listen, I put together this SWOT analysis. I really feel like I'm good for the position. Let me explain why, because it's right here. Would you share this with that person, or would they think I'm coming across as far too boastful? And they said, this person, it might be a little boastful. So hold it in your back pocket, which is no problem because I did it for me. I wrote this thing to be prepared for the interview. And so we're asking questions. I'm referencing this thing while I'm on the phone with them. And I was asking him questions based off of the threats, and it just became a normal part of the conversation. She never knew it was there. Then I get referred on to the next interview. And the person said, what'd you do in preparation for this? I said, well, actually, I put together a SWOT analysis. Are you familiar with SWOTs? He's like, yeah. I said, well, do you want me to send it to you? He's like, yeah, go ahead. The rest of the interview for 45 minutes was about the SWOT. I just took control of the interview. Do you see what we're trying to do here is, you're not trying to manipulate the interview. You're not trying to come across as cocky. But what we're trying to come across is prepared. How have we prepared? How have you done your research? Because everyone is going to go online and look at the company website and tell you, we were created in 1997, our revenues are $422 million a year, and our mission statement is X. You have not done anything to differentiate yourself from anyone. So I've just regurgitated all the things you're going to hear before. This differentiates yourself. And so how you apply it to the interview process is up to you, and do it based off of feel. Don't jam it down someone's throat. But I had an interview yesterday. And the interview we had, it was a face-to-face, so I had folders. I kept the folders out with my notebook. And I keep copious notes. I take notes on everything. That's just my learning style. And it helps me to become an effective listener. So as I'm listening, I'm taking notes down, so it shows that I'm engaged in the conversation. And I didn't even bother bringing out the SWOT until the last part. And I made some adjustments to my resume. I said, this one might be a little bit more pleasing to your eyes, my resume. And some of the things we talked about today actually came from a SWOT analysis I put together. If you're interested, I can give you a copy. She said, yes, I would. And it became part of the conversation. And they may say, no, we're okay. And then you just move on. So figure out, yes.
Just to understand, SWOT analysis, to understand it's about you and the company. Because so the strengths would be what I can offer, but all this information about weakness would be weakness of the company, not yours.
Or of the position, if you can get down to that level.
And the way you get it, obviously you don't get that online. You get like by knowing someone that works there can share some information for you too. And also maybe on the position description if it gives you something, but it's not. So that's how you get that information. And
that's a great question or in comment. If you don't know anyone that's in the organization, there are some cases you may not be able to put together a full one of these. You can put together a partial one based off of what you know to still help you get your thoughts together. But the other part of just going on the company website, you're only getting one side of the story. If it's a larger company, go to the news. Pull out the news and say, so the media, I understand, is talking to you about your regulatory practices, ... Might be one of the weaknesses that I put here is media scrutiny. How do you deal with media scrutiny? Or you might put some things in there of turnover rates or attrition rates, or those types of things can all come into play. You build this the way that you want. Because what this does is this takes it down to a different level. So think in terms of big picture. Understand the company, the mission, the SWOT, gets it down to the role or the position itself. The next thing is the long-term vision, the multi-generation plan. It's the thing that's on there, it's on the bottom. And it's hard to read, but on the left side, put anything you want, and I'll explain that in a second. But this answers the question, what are you going to do for me on day one? Well, my answer to that question is always going to be, meet new people. What you really want to know from me is, what are you going to do for me on day 30, day 60, and day 90? So if I put together, now I'm taking my random brainstorming thoughts, and now I'm going to add some tactics to it. So I might have down the left side, for if anyone's been in project management, this one lays out DMAIC, the design, measurements, analytics. But it doesn't have to be that on the left side. I've recently changed this, depending on the position itself, to maybe people, process, design. So people might be, meet my immediate direct reports, or the people I'll be working with. Maybe the next week I'll meet all the business partners I'll be working with. Maybe it might be gathering all the critical stakeholders who are pertinent to decisions that have to be made. So now you're taking it to a different level. So what do you do under people for day 30? Well, now I start to understand of who might be other people in other departments that I might be working with. Who are some people 90 days from now that might be companies, competitors that are out there that I might be working with, and maybe I start to do some benchmarking, but you see how it plays itself out over 30, 60, and 90 days. There's a great book out there, by the way. It's called The First 90 Days. And the author, I can't remember his name, but he actually just recently put a new edition of that out there. It's called The First 90 Days, Strategies to Have the Greatest Success. And it talks about early wins. It talks about digging in, really understanding the business. It's really obvious stuff that we never think about. And so how do you communicate early wins to say I'm finally getting it, or I'm working with my teammates on this? So it's a great book, and if you do nothing more than just look it up on Amazon and look at the glossary, there's a top 10, take the top 10. Really good stuff. So you take this long-term vision, and this might take a couple hours, so you want to make sure you're investing the right amount of time, and it can grow over time. Use it as a note-taking. So when you're doing these notes, put them online and let this thing go, because you usually don't get your interview right away. Yeah.
I think I missed something for in terms of this long-term vision. Am I looking into in respect to that specific position or in general? Well,
I would say, assume you're getting the job.
mm-hmm.
And what are you going to do on day 1, day 30, day 60, and day 90? And I've actually been able to use this multi-generation plan when I've been hired as my game plan. And then there was one time, there's been one time where I've used it where I did not get the position. And the person said, you have just aligned the position for the person who's going to be taking it, who is going to be hired, who, by the way, deserved to get it. They had 10 more years of experience than I did. And that person who saw that never forgot me. He is someone in my job search that I've reached out to, and he remembers that. He remembers that time. So, again, be memorable and differentiate yourself. Is this stuff required? No. Is it memorable? Yes. Does it differentiate yourself? Absolutely, unequivocally. So let's go back to what interviewers are looking for. We're thinking in terms of the ability to not only think quickly on your feet, but to be clear, concise, succinct. I asked that question, tell me a little bit about yourself, from somebody. And I was a phone interview, and I hit mute, and I did this. And I listened for 20 minutes. And it went on, and on, and on. It was a 30-minute interview. For 20 minutes, he told me about himself. That's great. But I don't know if it aligns to the job. He did not engage me in the conversation, and I got bored as an interviewer. You have to think in terms of clear, concise, succinct. What you also have to stay away from are those ancillary questions that you might ask of them. Have I said enough? Do you want me to keep going? You might have to ask those questions if it's a phone interview and you really can't get a feel of what the person, but if you're doing face-to-face, look them in the eye and say, are you getting it? Because if their eyes start to roll a little bit, you can... But remember, every answer you give is a speech. Introduction, body that supports it, and conclusion. And that's why I am the most qualified person for this job. And that's why I want to be an oak tree. It is concluded with confidence. Because it's about that confidence that is going to tell them, I know what I'm saying, I'm building credibility with you, and you know I'm starting to build this presence with you, whether it's an executive presence or a leadership presence that you feel good about. And even someone who's painfully shy and introverted, and yes, I know you won't believe it based off of today, I am painfully shy and introverted. But this isn't an act. This is me. Because I gained confidence in these situations because I failed far too many times early in my career. And I know what it's going to take to succeed, and what it takes to succeed is confidence. There are articles and research abound. Just look under confidence and success articles, and they will pop up all around you. The research will tell you the perception of you from that other person will go exponentially if they believe that you're credible and confident. And so you're providing them unanswered questions with your confidence. You're giving them answers without even speaking. And that's what it's all about. The other thing we want to talk about is independent thinking. There's this question that was asked of me. If you go to YouTube, my YouTube channel, look under Thomas Dowd or Tom Dowd Toastmasters. It'll pop up on YouTube. It's a 3-minute video. The question was asked in Toastmasters. It was the district level. 100 plus clubs, 7 competitors, and this is for the district championship. And they asked of us the question, what's on your bucket list? Now, we had no idea what the question was going to be ahead of time. And we each entered the room one at a time, so we had no idea what the question was going to be. And I was the 4th one to go. The first thing I hear when I hear bucket list is, that's going through my head, is what?
When you die.
When you die, and list. Die list, die list, die list. I also very quickly thought in my head, the first 3 people ahead of me are going to get a list that they want to do before they die, and so are number 5, 6, and 7. So somewhere within about a 7-second span, I had to say I have to differentiate myself from anyone else that's in here, or I'm just going to be one of the masses. And so I gave it the answer that said, I don't have a bucket list. I have everything that I want. And let me explain why. And went down a completely different tangent. I didn't know where I was going at the time, but I finally got there. And I tell you this not because I'm bragging, but I'm telling you this because of the context. It's a story I could share in an interview. It's how you think quickly. You're sharing how you think quickly on your feet. When we talk about interviews, you talk about strengths and weaknesses a lot of times. Well, if you had the choice to go one way or the other, where does everyone usually migrate to? We want to go to strengths, but we end up talking about these weaknesses a lot of times. Your weaknesses are your strengths. So let's ask Tom the question, what's your greatest weakness? Tom, what's your greatest weakness? Communications. I was a communication major in college in 1990. I was told for 18 years on my performance appraisals that I couldn't communicate. I was told I couldn't relate to the audience. I had poor listening skills. I spoke over people. And I rambled. I joined Toastmasters. Toastmasters has taught me to be clear, concise, and succinct, and it's given me confidence I never dreamed of. To the point where I actually wrote a couple books that I've done fairly well. One was on communication skills. So what is Tom's greatest strength? Communication. Your strengths are always your weaknesses. So start with your strengths, just as you're doing on your elevator speech. Put 2 columns down next to each other, and then cross it out and put 1 column. Your strengths and your weaknesses. You might have to double them up, like 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses on top of each other, and know which is which, but they are all your strengths, because your weaknesses should be things that you either are currently working on or have worked on, and you've changed and transformed because of it. Because behavioral-based interviewing, let's go back to Aaron Hernandez. I want examples from your past that will tell me how you're going to be in the future. So a lot of questions, we're not getting the what's your greatest accomplishments question. We're not saying tell me about yourself type questions. We are to get a feel and to build a relationship in the interview. But the questions we're getting now is tell me a situation when. So let's go into a couple examples. Why don't you tell me about a time when you had to deal with a difficult coworker? Why would I ask that question?
So your social skills.
Social skills? Good.
Conflict resolution.
Conflict resolution, all of that. So there's a lot going on in that question, and it was a very short question. Because the answer I give will tell what I've done in the past and how I'm going to be in the future. And will I be able to tell as an interviewer if you are telling me the truth, if you're BSing me? Is it pretty easy to tell?
Yes.
Not always.
Not always.
Not always. But if I ask enough of these types of questions, we'll be able to figure it out. Have you guys taken any tests online that had similar questions? There's a lot of tests online that people are doing as a pre-interview piece. If you do those, answer them as well as you possibly can based off of who you are, and don't try to make up the answers. Guessing how you think someone's going to be, because really what those questions are built to do is to build consistency in your own answers. So looking for inconsistencies between two similar questions you may not even realize was but the other thing is you're going to get these types of questions that, let's say, it's about conflict resolution. It's about bringing your past into how you're going to deal with the future. So give me a time where you had issues or your ethics were questioned in the workplace.
If you honestly haven't had something like that,
then I would say I haven't, but I'll tell you right now, I have unquestionable, unwavering ethics. There had to have been a time, personally or professionally, that someone has questioned your ethics. Oh, come on. So if the question came up to you, and this was a real interview question, I think I got it off of that CNN article again. So if you see someone stealing a quarter, would you tell? Yes or no? So think about your answer. If your answer was no, it's only a quarter. The next question is, what dollar amount would you? That's an ethics question. And you might want to say, well, the boss will never hear. The boss will never know. Just take 5 more minutes after lunch. No big deal. You know, those things come up. Or if you have kids, you always hear the question, do you tell your kids white lies? Is that okay to tell your kids white lies? I'm not expecting you to answer that here, but those are the same questions we've all thought. Ethics.
And is it sometimes, again, the same point of avoiding responding yes or no, but saying it depends on the context, depends on the situation. I could not say yes or no. In some circumstances will be yes, in some circumstances will be no. So I at that point give an example where it would be yes, or I could keep it just general like that. It depends.
And where I would take, remember, we're trying to control the interview. So I would take that situation and say, well, that's an interesting question you ask, but if I understand the context correctly, I'm going to go down this path and let me explain why. And now you take it down the path you want it to go. And now you can maneuver along that path for yourself. And if they say, well, actually, I was thinking more along the lines of the other way, then you can move along that way. And it's interesting on the question, tell me a little bit about yourself. I always get the question, well, do you want personal or professional? What's the answer most of the time?
Professional.
Or both. It's going to be at least professional, but I might even throw personal in there. So on my elevator speech, and then I might add, depending on the situation itself, that I have 3 daughters and I live in Maine, or that I've written a couple books, or that I'm obsessed with Toastmasters International, or I'm a member of the National Speaker, whatever it might be. Because there are going to be questions that are not asked in the interview that you really, really want to be asked for yourself.
Although in your resume, some of these, not the daughters part, but that you're Toastmasters or you wrote the books that I assume you should be having there.
They are my resume.
Okay. So
And here's the one assumption, this is the only assumption I'll allow you to make on a resume. Assume that no one read it.
Yeah.
Because your program I give on resume writing is make your story come alive. You have to bring this context out on the resume. It might say I wrote a book. Yippee. When people, I'm terrible at sales as you can tell. As I'm sitting at a book signing, people would walk by and it's like, hey, you want to read a good book? And they'll say no. I was like, all right, you want to read a bad one? I've gotten more sales from that because I was saying, how are you doing? And they're like, I'm great. And they keep walking. And I say, okay. You want a good book? How about a bad? And we had a good time. You're allowed to have a good time in an interview. And what's really interesting about My comfort level and my confidence in the interview setting came about when I stopped trying to impress the interviewer. And let me keep giving you a list of all the great things that I've done, or let me do everything I can to break out of my shell to give you some type of answer to possibly take me. And I just started to be me. I'm sitting at the table talking to my family. I'm enjoying the conversation. I spent 3 hours in interviews yesterday and I loved every minute of it. I felt right through the coals in one of them, but I loved the challenge of saying, you're throwing challenging questions my way. She said to me, stop with the buzzwords. Now, that was her context. I was actually answering the way that I thought. She said, stop with the buzzwords and just tell me what you want. Love the straightforward approach to it, and I said, okay. I said, let me throw it in layman's terms and probably using some financial terminology, and we had fun with it. And I went down this path with this woman, and I don't know if she's going to take me or not, but I know I felt good about the answers when all said and done. You have to learn to be yourself when you're doing it. You have to be creative. You have to be fresh. You have to differentiate yourself as you're going through this, and think in terms of the patterns that you're creating. Do you have a history of working well on teams? Do you have a history of working well as an independent contributor? What position are you applying for? You want to use patterns that lead you to the things that you've had success about. If you have another question, give me a time when you weren't a good teammate. I might have shocked you in the interviews. I've always been a good teammate. Huh. And then you're going to come up with an example because you're creating that new pattern for yourself. So did you get your question answered, or you want me to stop? Okay.
No, you did.
Okay, so let's talk about, we talked about the preparation, we talked about making it a two-way dialogue, don't make it a Q&A. Talk about the real you and let your stories come alive. So now let's talk about the pitfalls.
Can we go back just to
Sure.
the last point you make, where, well, like an example that you could make yourself negative by asking when were you not a good teammate. In this case, like, I would say probably is not good to say I was never been, but use the situation that maybe it never happened, but at least say, how would you act if, or something minor, even if it was never a big thing. The point is, like, should I ever say no? That doesn't sound like it's correct. You should to some extent elaborate.
There's no right or wrong answer,
Yeah.
but come up with an answer that you're comfortable with. But it's a true story. Someone called me, or excuse me, someone ran into me as I was running out the door to a meeting. I was late for, and they said, Tom, do you have a minute? And I said, actually, I'm going to this meeting. And I said, is it important? And they kind of looked down and took a deep breath and said, no, I guess we can talk about it later. So I ran to my meeting. I came back and I never saw that person again. I was a bad teammate. That person left on leave, stress leave, and all I had to do was probably give them 30 seconds of my time. It was at that point I'm going to ask more questions if someone says, Tom, do you have a minute? And I'm in a hurry. I now get a little bit more context before I do that, and that's a lesson that I've carried with me now for 15 years. Pretty powerful story. Just popped up a second ago. I was wrong, and don't ever be afraid to admit that you were wrong. Don't ever be afraid. What's important to the interviewer is that you learn from your mistake. Wouldn't you rather have someone tell you that they've improved their communication skills versus they were born with them? And made the effort to fix themselves, or made the effort to fix relationships or deepen relationships. These are the things you want to come back to. And that's what comes down to the pitfalls. One of the pitfalls is this lack of confidence of, I made some mistakes, I don't want to list them out. My dad was an HR director for Sears. I've been mock interviewed more times than you can shake a stick at. And the first question he ever asked me is, Tom, what are your strengths and weaknesses? And I said, I'll get back to the strengths, and here are my 7 weaknesses. You want me to keep going? Because that's what our mind is telling us to do when we're lacking the confidence. Turn those things into strengths and know that you've learned from your mistakes. In Toastmasters, when we give speeches, people say, oh, I just messed up. I'm sorry. Can I start over? No. You can't, because I want you to muscle through it. You will gain audience credibility when someone sees that you've made a mistake and you've been able to rise above it. The best speech I ever gave was the one I forgot the words in the middle of it. I think I even got a standing ovation for that one, for messing up. But that's the point, is people feel with you, they empathize with you. And if you can build an emotional relationship with the person asking you the questions, it's not a bad thing. I'm not funny. So my wife tells me that all the time. I'm not going to go in an interview and tell you a bunch of jokes and try to be the funny person. I know personality-wise I'm not. Every once in a while, do I have something that's funny to say? Sure. I'll throw it in there. But I don't try too hard to be funny. I know that I'm not. So I try to be a little bit more inspirational and motivational, more along my comfort level. Be your personality type there and let it shine. When you're doing it, if you're quiet and shy, that's okay. Be confidently quiet and shy. Well, I don't like to brag about myself, but you asked the question, so let me give you some things that I think work pretty well for me. You can confidently do that. Quiet people can and have been proven to succeed probably more than the extroverted person anyway. Research has proven that. Your inability to talk about yourself is going to be a pitfall. Your reaction to a surprise question is going to be a pitfall for you. If you overreact, I mean, you get a chuckle out of it. I mean, if you say that's funny, I've never heard that question before. Interesting question. It gives you that extra 5 seconds or so to respond. But don't sit there with your jaw down here. Who's that? What? Because that's what the interviewer is looking for. I want to see if you're going to succeed. But that shock is what I'm looking for. Because research will also tell you that we can all succeed on calm waters. When everything's going well and Red Sox are winning games, a clubhouse you always hear is great, and people are doing well, for another sports analogy, or smooth sailing, all that, we're all going to succeed. Everyone can do things when things are stable, going well. Figure out where your stress points are, and then ask yourself, have you succeeded during those points? Leaders in those moments of stress is what we're looking for here. Because that's when I throw 7 projects your way, I want to know how you're going to react. That's why I'm asking these behavioral-based questions, to get that response. Because if you're giving me that surprise look with a question about what type of tree are you going to be, and your boss asks you to prioritize 3 things, and you go, and you give that same reaction, that's what I'm looking for as an interview. If you can't handle the tree question, you're not going to handle the job I'm about to throw your way. Jobs are stressful in their own special way, but they are. And I love when people are like, oh, my job's so stressful. What do you do? Does it really matter? There's going to be stress at every job, and there's going to be success at every job too. You have to find it. And you have to answer it that way. Give them the answers, not that they want, but give the interview the answers that shows who you are and brings you out in the best light. The questions that you get, I might ask a yes-no question. Am I really looking for a yes-no? And less of, have you ever been arrested? You know, those types of things. Yes, no, to the job. Outside of that, I'm looking for elaboration. Always have an elaborate answer. And even if it's an extra 30 seconds tacked on, you don't have to make it 3 minutes or 7 minutes each time. But say, let me give you an example. Your answer should always be followed with, let me tell you how, or let me give you an example. Always. Regardless of whether it's asked. This is your time to bring things out on an interview from your resume that may not be asked. You know, on my resume I have, in addition to the books and my other fun stuff that I do, is I have on there that I run 20 miles a week. Have you ever seen that on a resume before? It says married, 3 children. Am I allowed to ask that in an interview? No. But now that I see it, am I inviting you to create your story about who I am? Stable, at least on paper. Excellent health. And he might say, I saw your ring. I put it there, now I can ask. I see you run. I do marathons. No kidding. I don't. But now it's creating this conversation. One of the things I have on our volunteer activities is I am the official announcer at the U.S. National Toboggan Championships. I always get that chuckle, don't worry.
Debacle?
U.S. National Toboggan Championships in Camden, Maine.
I don't know, it's like a sled?
It's a wooden sled.
Okay, okay.
It's on a 400-foot thing.
Snowball.
It's at the Camden Snowball. And this guy says, how do you win the National Toboggan Championships? I said, funny you ask. And that's how our interview started. So your resume, we can spend hours talking about this too, but feel free to differentiate yourself even on paper and then bring that alive. And if it's not on paper, be willing and able to say, you know, what do you do for fun on the side? Well, when it's 30 below in February in Maine, I like to put myself in a nice heated shed while everyone else is out there, and I like to announce a U.S. National Toboggan Championship. And they say, how'd you get that job? Well, whatever it may be is going to lead down this path because it's all about the relationship you're building with that person, either across the table or across the phone line. That's what it's all about. You want to keep your answers clear, concise, but don't go rambling for that 20 minutes. I don't need to hear that you have horses and chickens and cats unless it's pertinent to the question itself. I was laid off. Oh, I can badmouth my company. But why? I really can't. It was a business decision, I get it. Are there some things about the company I don't like? Sure. Did they cut the budget? Yeah. Was I in the wrong place at the wrong time? Absolutely. But am I going to badmouth this company? Why? Nothing is ever gained by doing that. But yet the number of times I've heard in an interview of, I don't like my past company, or your company's so much better than the other one. Don't do that type of comparison unless you're saying I see opportunities. Because some of the things I saw that really got my attention in the old company, I've learned from those mistakes, and I think I could fix customer service. Or I saw a marketing plan I think can work well here that, you know, we tried a couple times and it failed, but let me explain why it failed and why we can put it into place. It's all about positive vibes moving forward. It's in the past. Your past with that company stopped on the day it happened. You are constantly looking forward, and how do you use your past to align you to the future? That is a major pitfall. I might be stating the obvious, but I've heard it in far too many interviews of people bad-mouthing their old company.
Can I ask a question? Like, I also was laid off, and it was also like they lost a big project, and again, I could say wrong kind of time. Or,
Wrong place at the wrong time. Mm-hmm.
So when you go into an interview, sometimes they may not ask you, but if they were to ask you, or do you even offer the information?
I offered the information in 2 interviews ago.
Yeah.
The question came up and they said, why are you no longer at the company? I said, I was laid off for budget cuts. And I said, the first question I asked when that person called me with that bad news, the first question I asked is, I want to ensure that it had nothing to do with my performance. And they unequivocally answered, it has nothing to do with your performance.
That's what they told me too, but sometimes you feel like, what? But there's many people, they pick a group of people, and you're on that group of people. So I felt the same way, even though they told me, oh, it has nothing to do. But
that's the answer you got, and that's the answer you walked away with. So that's good enough for me. And if they say, well, could you elaborate a little bit more on that? I would go in and say, listen, I was a 23-year veteran. I'm sure my salary compared to others was a little bit higher than others. They made a business decision. Wrong place at the wrong time. And I said, you know, interesting enough, I got the project done 18 months early. That's a problem. Don't over-succeed. And they got a kick out of that. And we had some fun. And I did end the project 18 months early. So now they see a little bit of success. We had a little bit of fun with it, and we moved on. It's water under the bridge. And you make it water under the bridge. You may be egged to talk about it. Don't get involved in it. Don't get baited into giving something like that. Regurgitating your past job responsibilities, but not your accomplishments. Same thing on your resume. Go back and read your resume. If it only says your job responsibilities, you're selling yourself short. You should always come up with your accomplishments. If they said, tell me a little bit about what you did in your previous role. Well, my previous role, I was a project manager. Okay, next. I'm giving that elaboration. So I might come in and say it was a $100 million project, very complex, very large, went across multiple lines of business within the bank. And then what we did, we were able to consolidate a lot of that together. We were able to save $5 million, and we were able to finish the project 18 months early. Did I come out and say, look what I did? No, I said we, I said the team, and these are the things we partnered in doing this. But I included my accomplishment along with the job responsibility that came along with it. You didn't ask me the direct question, but I was asking you that question as an interviewer. And you have to think in terms of what is the interviewer really asking. They're not all playing games. Interviewers are not always playing games, but as interviewers, we may not be asking you the right questions the right way. So we can interpret the question and say, well, based off of what I'm hearing, or what you're asking is, and then go down that path. Don't make stuff up. Don't guess. Don't lie. Don't misinterpret. Don't oversell something that you can't back up. Give facts, and give the facts that are out there, but don't get caught up in the things where they then can ask clarifying questions or ask for your own elaboration, and then you say, well, I think that's what it was. Don't use the word think. It should be a fact, and use facts that are out there. And don't put yourself in a position where you have to scramble or you have to backtrack. That really lends to poor credibility, and you pretty much shot the interview if you have to backtrack. Talk about only the facts. This is where your ethics come in, because you may not have meant to do that, but take your time and think it through. The other thing is when they ask for questions. We always say, well, I just read an article. We force the questions on them. What I suggest in the middle of the interview is don't wait to the end for the Q&A. Just say, do you mind if I ask a question based off of what you just asked there? And now you're involved in a two-way conversation. You're going to come to the end and they're going to say, do you have any questions? And you might have a couple. And you can have the basic ones. You know, what are your priorities going into the rest of this year? What are your priorities going into next year? What is the biggest obstacle you had to overcome? I mean, these are philosophical questions or tactical questions, depending on who you're talking to. But there's nothing wrong with any one of those questions of the interview. Watch me throw this on YouTube and everyone's like, I'm asking me that at the end of the question. But at the end of the interview, you have the right to ask questions that help you move along. It might not be the time and place to ask about salary and those types of things, depending on where you are in the interview process. But ask some questions that are going to help you gain a comfort level of what this thing is all about. You know, a key question might be, what's your turnover rate? You know, what's the average length before someone moves on to another position? Be careful with that question, because it might say, I'm only here for the stepping stone. So be careful in the context of the question. But, or you might even say, I appreciate it, I don't have any questions right now, because I was able to ask them throughout the interview. If you don't ask any in the interview and you say, I don't have any questions, that's probably one of the, I just read an article, I did read an article, that's one of the biggest mistakes people make is at the point where you're asked if you have any questions and we say, no, we don't. Don't force the questions on someone because you just read an article, but make sure you're engaged in the conversation throughout the entire day. And then you're asking questions at the end that you don't care about. Well, what's the company's stock price? What's the company's stock symbol? Hey, just asking these ridiculous questions to be forced as a question to be asked. You're better off not asking anything. But I say this and we kind of chuckle, but they're questions I've got. And they are real. And people do that because they're in this pressure situation, because people will give us the true you in a pressure situation. And if your true you is going to be asking these types of questions in an interview, I'm going to be saying, what are you going to do for my clients or my customers in the middle of a pressure situation? And you may have just sold yourself out of the interview itself. So I'm going to stop here and ask, let's just go wide open with content questions. Fire away.
Have you ever been interviewed where you feel as though you
That's a great question. The question on, can someone be threatened with my experience level? I mean, you have 23 years of experience. It's on paper, it's pretty obvious. But what I've also learned, and I think my success over the last 5 years has, I've really broken out of these, and you're seeing it in organizations today. Corporations and big businesses are breaking out of this traditional up and down vertical hierarchy into this flattened organization or horizontal. And so it's about partnerships, and it's about doing things right and getting the job done and not looking for all the accolades that you've done things by yourself. It's about partnership and collaboration these days. So I'm hoping in the conversation today I can give some examples where I've been a great partner, or I've been a great teammate, or times when I've collaborated with other people. Title is irrelevant to me right now. Getting the job, a job that I love, not a job I'm desperate for, there's a difference. A job that I love, I'm going to give the answers that I think match me into that job. I have the skills. There's nothing wrong with having the background and experience. There's nothing wrong with that. You just have to be careful. You don't want to age yourself. You know, you don't want to age yourself in the sense of, I have this 23 years. That's not going to be the first thing that comes out of my mouth. What I'm going to say is I have a few years of compensation experience, and I'm going to align it to what I'm applying for. Because you're going to see in the paper, for example, I'm sure you've seen this in job seeking, and you may have had other coaches tell you this, but it might say I'm looking for 3 to 5 years worth of experience. But yet the description reads like it's 10 to 15 to 20. Why? Salary. You can't do what I'm expecting you to do with those 3 to 5. You can do it with 10, but it's done with salary. But you also have to be very careful if you don't want to price yourself out by saying I have 23 years of experience. You want to be careful in saying I have enough experience that I know this inside and out. I'm a subject matter expert, or I'm not a subject matter expert, but I'm a consummate learner. Let me give you some examples of how I've been a consummate learner. I didn't go to school to be a banker. I was a communication major. I knew nothing of the risk world when it came to financial institutions. I spent the last several years doing risk assessments and business controls. I know them now. You learn that stuff, and you have to give those examples of how you've learned it. Great question. What else?
I mean, you've pretty quickly been getting yourself interviews even, so I guess how have you done that? I know it's a little general, but...
There's another great book that's out there, it's Never Eat Alone. I'm just confirming what I think I already knew. My company was taken over 6 years ago, very eye-opening to me. I knew I had to network, I didn't know how to network. And I had someone who just about held my hand through and said, start doing it. And so once a month, for the last 4 years, I've been meeting with someone who was at least 2 levels above me in my company. I started with 2 levels above me to force me outside of my comfort zone and help me gain the confidence. Long story short is I realized they were people too, and they like talking about their business. Not a bad problem to have. Built an extremely strong network over time. And the reason why I bring up Keith Ferrazzi's book, Never Eat Alone, is one of the chapters is called Build It Before You Need It. And so I have 600 plus people on my LinkedIn. It will be the 4th book, D-Day. D-Day when my job was looking for a job. But part of the lessons learned there is also don't trust your network. Trust that your network is going to be there and you've built it up over time, but you're not building a checklist. You're building relationships. That's what it's all about. And there are some relationships I did not build very well. I checked off the box. Yippee. But there are your primary contacts, which by the way are your worst contacts. They are too close to you. They know far too much about you, and they can't think forest through the trees for you. They might, your immediate friends, your immediate colleagues, they're the ones who want to help you the most, but a lot of times can't give you the most constructive use of your time. They're the ones checking in on you all the time. Are you okay? Is everything going on? It's like, I've got interviews, I've got stuff. You know, they're not wasting your time, and you know they care. But it's the secondary and the tertiary contacts that are helping. I talked to somebody on the way down here. I can't even remember if we crossed paths. I really can't. And I said that to him. I said, we're on LinkedIn. I know you know these people. You have a really familiar name, and I'm straight up transparent with you. I can't remember if we crossed paths. And after that little stuff, okay, that's fine. Now let's talk. What I'd love to hear is more about what you do. It was a true networking meeting. It wasn't not job searching. You have to be careful with your networking. It's not all about the job search. It's about, can you meet with someone who can get you to someone who can get you to someone. Never leave a networking meeting without asking the question, can I have another name 2 or 3 that I should meet with? Never leave a networking session without doing it.
And the goal of networking is?
The goal of networking is what you want it to be. But if your primary goal is always for job seeking, and I know I'm telling you this, we're all deep into this thing now. It might be a little late for that. And I've been obvious. I said, I'm out of a job. I've been very obvious with people in my networking, but I'm asking for the networking. I'm not asking them for a job. They have to understand that. Because most of their conversations I'm having is, I don't have anything open, I'll keep my eyes and ears peeled for you. Heard that one before?
Yes.
But how many times in a networking situation they said, you know what, I do know somebody. Let me see if I can get you connected with that person. That's the value. That little note right there is what's going to make the networking session so powerful. And so you have to, if you're going in with the pure find me a job mentality into a networking situation, it's going to backfire at some point. Or you're just going to get a bunch of sympathy, which is nice sometimes, but not all the time. I'm sorry to hear about that. I wish we could talk in better circumstances. But now it's about the networking piece. Build your network. Broaden your net. Look for things. Don't assume, if you're on LinkedIn and you look at some of the connections, don't assume this company's too small for you, or assume this. I made an assumption on this company, but I worked with this person 10 years ago. So I was like, there's a method to my madness when it comes to my job search. It's a whole other many hours of discussion, but ultimately it is talk to your immediate contacts, talk to the people where you think you have your best chances. On LinkedIn, talk to the companies where you think you have the best fit, and then start alphabetically from your LinkedIn top down. I can't even get past the C's. I'm getting so many callbacks. And because I trust my network. I trust that there's a ton of people out there. There's a ton of people who won't get back in touch with me. It means I didn't make the right connections. That's my fault. I could have done more to build that relationship. But you go alphabetically and talk. So I went alphabetically. I talked to them. She's like, can we have coffee tomorrow? By the way, never turned down a free lunch. I've had 3 lunches. This is great. No, I don't do multi-level marketing is what it's called. Sorry I don't do that, but thanks for lunch. But anyhow, I had breakfast with this woman, and this woman's like, wow. I feel like you're talking about my resume. She's like, yeah, I know. I saw it, and I kept up with you on LinkedIn and some of those other things. She's like, yeah, you mind if I get your resume to someone? I'm like, mind? I invite you to. She gets the resume. I'm all in the person sends me a note and says, hey, do you have time to talk? I was like, I have all the time in the world. You want to interview tonight? We interviewed that night. She said, we take all these people and we send them out to Chicago to interview with the CEO. I'm going to Chicago in 2 weeks for a place where I know in my mind I assumed nothing will run with this company. Because it's not a financial institution. That's my background. Broaden your net. Keep your net extremely broad. Keep it broad. Never assume. Good question. I know it's not easy, but realize this is the new norm, and don't get panicked over gaps in your resume. People will tell you that people understand very quickly, so don't feel the need to defend or explain why you got laid off. You got laid off. Now what can you do for me? That's what you want to concentrate on.
I have 2 quick questions.
All right.
That you can close. In terms of your networking, if within your company or outside, if it's someone you don't have relations with, or someone you have very little or you knew for a long time but you never got in touch, you just say, hi, I just want to chat. What's the appropriateness of reaching out?
Hi, I'm Tom and I'd like to network. I'm that straightforward with it.
Yeah.
I do not beat around the bush. There's no need to beat around the bush. Listen, we all network. If you're networking to check off a box, If you are networking for your own selfish reasons, and yes, we're looking for a job, but don't take that as selfish reasons. It's listen, at some point, if anyone ever came to you and asked you the same question, you help them out, that's not really selfish. And the key point of is build a relationship is, I currently don't know who you are. I've heard an awful lot about you, or I got a chance to spend some time looking over your LinkedIn profile, and I'm intrigued by some of the work that you did. I reached out to somebody in Portland, Maine. I had no idea what they did, but their job description was interesting. Probably something I wouldn't even be interested in, but it was a real interesting job description. I said, tell me a little bit about that. You got my attention. I'd love to catch up. And we chatted for 15, 20 minutes. It was really cool. It was a great conversation, and I remember the conversation. I hope they remember me at some point. We connect. It is about the relationship. It is not about checking off the box. And you have to know that, because if you go into it thinking I'm going to check off the box and you're going to find me a job, the conversation will go down that path, and that's not a good path to be on. And you had a second question?
The other one was, I tend to give references mostly based on my supervisors. If you have a supervisor, there's two things. Some of them are very old. Should I find someone else in the company to give me a reference?
Depends on the company. There are certain companies that don't allow references when you leave. And that's an easy answer to saying that's why I have some outdated ones. When you go in and you look at the applications and they're looking for references, they're looking for your relationship to that person. You just don't have to be your wife or husband. But there's been times where I'll put manager/friend. Like, I've become friends with my manager.
Yeah.
Many years ago I didn't. But it's about building a relationship. It's okay to say that. They're going to call them up. You'd be surprised what some people say about it. If anyone ever do 360 feedback? If you ever done 360 feedback and you select all your friends and then you get this terrible results back, and you're like, what happened? Now you know what happens. The same thing happens with your references. So be selective with your references of people that you trust that are going to give honest feedback about you. I want someone to come in and say Tom's communication skills were horrible. I walked in, I know I have all these real examples from the last couple of days, but I walked in yesterday and this person I used to work with gave me a huge hug and said, Tom, you pushed me so hard many years ago, and I thank you for that. And you just never know what someone's going to say about you. Pick some people you trust and live with it. And don't worry about the dates that are on there. Don't go 30 years back. But if you have a relationship and you've known them for 10 years and you've kept up the relationship, there's nothing wrong with going to a boss from 10 years ago. One of my references, I've never even worked for directly. Worked under him several times. An incredible family guy, an incredible person I work with, and he is the most respected person in the company that I work with. I want to be him. Not his position, but I want to be him under pressure. I've learned a ton from him on how he handles people situations, how he handles himself, being politically correct while still being respected. Those are the things you learn from people and emulate. There's nothing wrong with taking a reference of someone like that. They don't have to be a boss. They ask for friends. There's a reason for that. They're the ones who know you the best.